Hi, everyone. Jonathan Brandt, GoOutLiving. Today's special guest, Dr. Darren Clair, anesthesiologist, lifestyle medicine, author of Creating Life of Vibrance. Welcome, Doctor.
Thank you, Jonathan. It's a pleasure to be here.
As we were talking a little earlier, we thought we'd start with the state of our healthcare system right now. And what are your thoughts?
Well, kind of
Big one right there.
yeah. So it's kind of like what we were talking about before we got on. It's all about perspective, right? We live in a capitalistic society, which has its pluses and minuses. But that's basically the bottom line is to be financially successful. And from the perspective of many in the what I call the medical industrial complex, this is the most successful business of all time. I mean, even it'll be interesting to see if AI tops it. But hey, listen, in the United States alone, we're spending well over $5 trillion a year on medical care. That's pretty impressive numbers, all right? So there are a lot of people who are making a lot of money. That's really not what we think about, though, as the individual, as people who are just trying to live our lives, with health. We have been trained to believe that this system is there to help us. And it's really not. It's kind of like the health insurance industry. We think that health insurance. We have health insurance because to help us stay healthy. It's like no, the health insurance industry is to make money, and what they want to do is they want to take your premiums and they want to keep them and use them, spend them on you as little as possible, so that they're happy, so their stockholders are happy, that sort of thing. So there's that disconnect, which is you just have to wake up and smell the roses. That's our system, and it doesn't mean that you can't, have good health and survive, whatever nature throws your way. But you can't rely on some outside entity, which is really just a money making machine. To You can't rely on them to really care about you. I mean,
Not on,
honestly, they just don't.
yeah, not on an everyday level anyway.
Yeah, no,
I mean,
no.
I think I read where you believe they're more of a reactive healthcare system than proactive.
Yeah, totally, totally. When and in terms of that, doctors, hospitals, surgery centers get paid much better when something's wrong, when something's broken, right? You do surgery and the surgeon makes a lot of money. You help somebody not need surgery and you get paid next to nothing. You know, when I first started Vibrance, I appreciate that people pay for their health insurance. They want to use their insurance. And so I said, okay, well, let me try. I'll bill insurance and see what happens. And honestly, Jonathan, I would spend because my typical appointments with I call them members, not patients, because I like to focus on positive, not on the fact that there might be something wrong. But anyway, my typical appointment with members is anywhere from a half an hour to an hour. And so I would, bill the insurance companies and they'd send me a check for 25 bucks. Right. I go, wait a second. That's not paying me. It's not even paying my staff. It's not paying my rent. I just can't do this way. But if and the same thing, for cardiologists, and no, slight intended, but when you could be paid a couple of $1,000s to put a stent in somebody's heart versus which takes of your time 10 minutes, because everything gets set up for you, versus spending a half an hour talking to somebody and you might make, let's say you make $125, like 1,500 versus 125. What do we think? I think we need to do a stint.
Right.
Right. I mean, it's human nature.
Right. But with that reactive aspect, people aren't coming out healthier, are they?
No, hey, you're absolutely right. We're just well, again, it's people are not healthier; they're surviving longer, right? And that's the way the dialogue has been directed. It's like, well, they're living longer. It's like, yeah, but look at the quality of life, as opposed to taking a proactive approach, which is what I believe in, which is saying, well, let's check the tires before we end up with a flat tire, on the side of the highway at 3 in the morning, right? That kind of makes sense to me. Let's change the oil before we need to have our engine overhauled. People do that for their car. Why don't they do that for their health? And they don't do it because their doctors have no experience and honestly no financial interest in doing that.
Well, it brings up I always think of my dad with this, mostly because the arguments we've had of what is good healthcare and what's not is, well, I do my yearly check. But what are you really getting out of that? Oh, well, they do blood work. But are they telling you anything?
Yeah. Yeah. No, they tell you everything's fine. See you in a year.
Or
Right.
take this pill. Oh, your
Or take this pill.
cholesterol is high, so take a statin. Or, yeah, blood pressure. Let's take some. That's really what they do. That's about it.
Yeah.
They're not
Yeah.
looking at
Yeah.
the root cause. I know that is becoming a huge term right now, but it's true. It's part of the preventive, looking for the root causes before they become a.
Exactly. Exactly. And that's what I've been focusing on. Well, since I started Vibrance, and well, even before I started Vibrance in 2002, it's like, unless you address the underlying cause, and nature has a way of talking to you, telling you that something's off, and it starts out with a whisper. And if you listen to it and you're proactive about, what's going on, lack of sleep or your diet or whatever it is, then you can fix the underlying problem. When you ignore it, then the voice gets a little louder. And when you avoid it long enough, and often it's unconscious because we just don't know that there's things we can do. I don't think people are intentionally doing anything to harm themselves, but eventually it leads to serious medical problems like cancer and heart disease and whatnot. But there have been messages along the way that we just ignore, again, for not intentionally, but because we don't know better.
Well, and I saw a study, I think it was yesterday, where my generation especially, uh, outcome's not looking real great as far as getting through life without disease. And I look back at my life and it was filled with drinking, smoking, you know, from the nutrition side. I mean, you're going through a drive through, you're having pizza delivered, everything the wrong way, really. But we thought, okay, we're young, it won't affect us in the long term. Well, it has.
Yeah,
And we
yeah.
still have kids that are doing that too. How do we, from a preventive side, how do we change that? How do we get their attention to say, hey, we did it wrong. We're trying to look out for you?
Well, that's a very good question, Jonathan. And by the way, I always like to frame it in terms of being proactive instead of preventive. The problem I've always had with the term prevention is you're still focusing on what's broken or what might break, as opposed to how do I stay healthy. And I truly believe that we have been born uh, with the God given tools to have good health, provided we, and this is kind of the focus of my book, is provided we use the tools that we've been given for good health, right? Which generally we don't because our parents didn't and their parents, you know, the truth of the matter is that these things have kind of snuck up on us, right? Because, 100 years ago, people walked much more than they do now, right? Just because that was how you got around. And 100 years ago, what was, the evening activity? I was sitting on your front porch and watching, if anything, if anybody walked by, that was like the newspaper. It wasn't scrolling on your phone, you know. And 100 years ago, there were no preservative. The preservatives in our food was through drying or through curing, right? But it wasn't like our food was packed with a bunch of preservatives and additives that our bodies had never seen in 2 million years of evolution. Things like that. Our our sleep. Why did we went to sleep when the sun went down? Because there was not much else going on, right? So we were getting enough quality sleep, and again, our stress levels were much, much. Did I say much lower back then? Right. And it's true. Stress. Looking at the news one eye is exciting, stimulating, but it's stress. And we are not designed for so much stress. You know, we were designed as hunter gatherers. And I love this. I'm getting a little bit off topic, but I think it's important, Jonathan.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Hunter gatherers, which our distant ancestors were, on average, they work 4 hours a day. Okay. And what does that work? Well, a large part of it's walking through the forest looking for berries, right? What you or I consider a vacation was their work day, right? And it was only 4 hours. The other flip side of it is that means that 20 hours of the day, they were either relaxing or sleeping. So they had much lower stress and they had much more recovery time. We flipped the switch totally. We have way more stress and much less quality sleep. And that, again, there's nothing wrong with it, but it's just not what we were designed for.
We've complicated life.
We have. Yeah. Yeah.
you know, and back then it was, we can say simpler. It really wasn't. It was probably pretty tough, but it was okay, let's go out and feed ourselves. It wasn't okay, or am I getting a like on Facebook? Am I, this constant, social
Yeah.
media, part of it that,
Yeah.
yeah, it just drives you crazy, doesn't it?
It will if you let it.
Right,
If you don't put the phone down, right?
right.
And that's part of the problem, Jonathan, is that we've because it's addictive. I mean, honestly, it really is. It changes your dopamine levels or whatnot. But typically, people these days, from the moment they get up, they're looking at their phone. What I got to do today? What's going on in the world? And then when they're going to sleep, the same thing. It's like, oh, I'm just going to scroll for a little while to help me drift off to sleep. It's not a good idea.
No, it's not. So let's go to the proactive part of it. When somebody comes into Vibrance, what would a plan look like to you for them to be proactive?
Fantastic question. So again, part of the reason my appointments are anywhere from a half hour to an hour is because I think any program has got to be comprehensive. We are not just a pair of eyeballs like an ophthalmologist may think, or we are not just a heart as a cardiologist might think. We are actually full human beings, physically, emotionally, spiritually. And you need to pay attention to some degree, not necessarily all the time, but you have to pay attention to all those aspects of our health, right? Because they all affect our physical, emotional, and spiritual health. So my appointments are not just, are you eating, but what are you eating? Like, no, what are you eating? How much chicken are you having every week? How much beef are you having? How many vegetables do you have on a daily basis? How much fruit? How much water do you drink? And this happens every appointment. And the reason I do that is because, again, we're so busy and there's so many things that can draw our attention that it's difficult to stay on track with things that you know are important, let alone things you don't know are important. So, we'll go through that. Exercise. What kind of exercise are you doing? When do you exercise? How intensely are you doing it? How frequently are you doing it? Um, Sleep. What time are you going to bed? What do you do in the evening after dinner to set yourself up for a good night's sleep? How fast do you fall asleep? How many times do you wake up? How rested are you in the morning? How many hours have you gotten? All those things are good indicators of how successful you are being in terms of what is going to affect whether or not you stay healthy or whether or not things start going sideways, right?
You're really getting into the behavioral aspect then, from
A
your
lot of it is that,
daily
yeah,
behavioral or
yeah,
habits. I know there's a
yeah.
difference between those two, but that's really what you're looking at to just start the whole process.
Right, right. And of course, I do blood testing, and when somebody's been under a lot of stress and has indications that the chronic stress is affecting them. We'll check their adrenal function. Best the way to do that is through saliva and things like that. But we can look at the neurochemistry and things like that. So there are other testing that I'll do, but and based on that, I'm going to make suggestions about changes to lifestyle, supplements that could be helpful to help somebody get back on track. To me, it's all about that, about getting back on track, because God is a better doctor than I am and better doctor than anybody. And if you can get the person back on track, then they can, as long as they do what they need to do, they can stay on track. But that's a big part of it, is staying on track. Part of that is helping people remember uh, to the things that we have discussed to stay on track. It's really, it's not so much the current model, the model that's been active for a long time now, is you go to the doctor, he's going to fix me. I don't believe that. I don't believe that. I think that we all fix ourselves. And sometimes it can be the doctor, the surgery, whatever it is, that gives us the confidence that we can heal ourselves, even though we don't know we're doing that. And we then, and this is not always, but this is, I think, the vast majority of the time, we then go on and heal ourselves. Um, so again, it's baked into the system, but we need to use the tools we've been given to for maximum benefit.
It's like go out living. It's an attitude for me and my wife.
Yeah, yeah,
It was
absolutely.
not only just not giving up, but it was learning. We both went back to school. I mean, that's what you're telling people is, yeah, get that attitude of you're going to take care of yourself here. You may need a
Uh-huh.
little help along the way,
Hmm. Hmm.
but it's really about you and you can heal
Hmm.
yourself. Yeah, support is great. I mean, that's part of why I'm doing Go Out Living is to create that community.
Hmm.
But we all need a little bit of help to find those tools as well.
For sure. Even, I mean, I do too. I think, if we think that, we don't need any help, well, we're mistaken. Let's put it that way.
Because
You know,
none of us know everything. It's impossible.
yeah, no, it's
And
not
everybody's so
possible.
different that we don't know what each other necessarily needs.
No, it's very, very true. Absolutely, Jonathan. But I do think, which again is kind of the reason I wrote the book, is we don't know everything. But again, if we start with the basics, like I've been describing, eating cleanly, eating whole foods, getting regular exercise, getting enough sleep, that's going to cover about 80% of the reasons why people go to doctors.
Something you brought up that's been kind of it's been tough for me to figure out is I'm coming off of surgery as well. I lost about 6 inches of my colon, all from treatments. It's just I'm now on the back foot trying to get ahead, trying to be proactive, like you say. As we know, nutrition is probably one of the toughest things to deal with right now in our culture. You brought up supplements. How do we know what to take?
Well, first, I do strongly feel that eating a varied whole food type diet will provide us with most of what we need. However, for a variety of reasons, again, which I point out in the book, our needs are greater today and the food is less nourishing. So, from that standpoint, it can be difficult to get everything we need, but it starts with diet. On top of that, there are tests which we can do, which can, elucidate deficiencies. Um, but also, typically, and this is something that, again, doctors have gotten away from, is, physical diagnosis. It used to be that, part of what you learned in medical school was to look at the person, to examine the individual for signs of deficiencies. What's going on with the nails? Are they striated? Or how does the tongue look? How does, are the eyes nice and clear? Um, how dry is the skin? Things like that. All of which are indicators, if you know what to look for, of either adequate levels or deficiencies. Unfortunately, again, due to the way medicine is practiced, which is get them in, get them out as fast as possible, doctors rely heavily on lab test results as the way to diagnose issues, right? And, it's so unfortunate because, for instance, I have a lot of women who will come to me with, what they think is a thyroid problem because they're having trouble losing weight and they're eating very little and they're exercising and they had looked on the Google, and Google said, well, this could be hypothyroidism, and so they go to the doctor and the doctor says, well, okay, well, we'll check your thyroid. So what does he do? He orders a blood test. He doesn't ask them about how they're doing symptom wise or physical signs wise. And the results come back. And of course, the results are in the normal range. So the doctor says, well, your thyroid's fine. You're fine. Just eat less or exercise more, which is so unfortunate because nothing could be further from the truth. The reason that that happens so often is something that we all learned in medical school, but have conveniently forgot, right? And the fact is that the normal range is just the application of a standard statistical formula. Due to the fact that everybody's different and people vary a lot. For instance, I have a patient who hasn't been in a little while, but he's 7 feet 4 inches tall. So when I stand up, the tip of my finger is how tall he is.
That's crazy.
But I also have people that come in that are 4 feet tall, right? They're both normal, they're just different, but they're very different. And the same thing, honestly, Jonathan, goes for every lab test there is. People vary a lot. And as a result of that, the labs just use this formula. The problem with that is that, again, it includes, due to the fact that people vary, the formula includes 95% of all people, not 95% of healthy people, 95% of everybody. 95% is almost everybody, right?
Right.
So if basically everybody's in the normal range, what does that lab test really honestly tell you?
Nothing.
You're right. Or no, no, honestly, Jonathan, you're wrong. It tells you one thing.
Okay.
It tells you the person's alive because they had blood that you could draw, but it doesn't tell you if that's the right number for them.
I've brought that up. I've had hundreds and hundreds of tests. My wife had hundreds of tests. My wife didn't, they figured she had cancer for at least 10 years before she was actually diagnosed. It missed, it continuously missed. And I think it's everything you're talking about. Not taking the time to actually talk to her, not really looking at her blood. I mean, there's so many parts of that that I heard one time they already know how they're going to diagnose you even before you get there by just simply what you fill out. And that's scary to me.
Yeah. Yeah, because how are you going to know? You're only, and what you fill out is only, if they even look at what you fill out, which often they don't, what you're going to fill out is just what, your response to their questions, which is not really necessarily the full story.
Half the time people lie anyway.
That's true too.
Now, if you're looking somebody eye to eye, it's a little bit harder to do that, but yeah. Um, okay, so from the proactive side, what we can relatively say the Western side of medicine isn't the proactive side. What side is? Is it, functional medicine? Is it lifestyle medicine? What do people look for? Who do they look for?
Well, it's li- both. I mean, it's lifestyle medicine. I mean, that's predominantly the reason why that specialty came into existence, was because of a growing appreciation of the importance of our lifestyle in terms of, affecting our health. Um, I often use a functional approach because, again, it's not just looking at the lab test, but what is that lab number doing for that individual? If they're, like, for instance, with the thyroid, if the woman, her numbers are in the lower end of the normal range, and yet from a functional standpoint, her her body's acting like she has an underactive thyroid. I'm going to try some thyroid. It's like, I'm not going to push her out of the normal range, the upper limit, but I'm going to say, well, what happens to those symptoms if we get you a little bit higher in the normal range? Are things better? To me, the bottom line is how that person is functioning is the ultimate. Seeing nice numbers on a piece of paper is fine, but what the person cares about is to feel good. I mean, that's the reason they come in. It's not because, look, my numbers are not good. Can you fix me? It's just like, I'm not feeling good. So what should I do?
Right. You talked about your book. Why don't you go through your book a little bit and what people can expect?
Well, thank you for that invitation. Yeah, so my book is just kind of, it took me years to write, just because I would write a little bit and then put it down. And, 6 months would pass before I realized, oh, I haven't done anything about my book. Uh, but anyway, it's just, comes from that realization that, well, first I started with just a little bit, how did I get here? Right? Because people hear anesthesiologist and they go, really? Anesthesiologist? All you do is put people to sleep, right? But even before I went into anesthesia, I wanted to help people be healthy. Initially started out in family practice because I thought that's one place that I could really impact health. But it turned out, and it's still the case, this is now almost 50 years later. I've been around for a little while. The Even back then, it's just about, seeing people, getting or arriving at a diagnosis as fast as possible, prescribing a pill or a procedure, and then, okay, we'll see you in 3 months, we'll see you in 6 months, you know see, bye bye. um and that's not what I'm all about, right? So, not being able to do that on a day-to-day basis, I said, I just can't do this. And I went into anesthesiology because I love science. I love physiology. I love why things work or don't work. Getting to the root cause. And anesthesiology has all that. But even as I was doing anesthesiology, it occurred to me, when I'd be sitting in the OR, providing anesthesia for emergency surgery at 3 a.m. A life-threatening procedure. People don't appreciate how well. I mean, some people often do, but that's a very high risk situation, right? um, and it occurred to me, kind of like along the lines of what we're talking about. It's like, you know what? If this person had just made some better choices, they wouldn't be risking their life right now. And furthermore, it occurred to me that, you know what? The system's not set up to help people in that regard. And so it occurred to me further that, well, you know what? I guess this is what I'm supposed to do. And from that led to the creation of Vibrance Medical Group first, where again, I designed programs to help people try and stay healthy. And we've changed the name now to Vibrance Health, but it's always been around helping people focus on health and what can they do to maximize their health. Because no matter what your age, no matter what your current state of health, there is always room for improvement. And that most recently became even more evident to me, Jonathan, because I was reading a paper out of the University of San Diego Medical School on people in hospice. So people who are about to check out. And even at the very last moments, believe it or not, their brain is still making new brain cells and making new connections, new synapses between those brain cells. So the body is always trying to heal, always up to the very end. So there's always the opportunity to have better health no matter what your current state of health.
It's funny because that makes me think about Christy in that last week and a couple days before her passing. I looked at her and go, I just don't see you going anywhere anytime soon. And it was because she was still playing board games with my son and she was still
Wonderful,
there.
wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell she was suffering a lot, but the mind was still going. And that's what you're talking
Hmm.
about. And
Yep.
that brings up one other point to me. And I think I read it to some. We are relying so heavily on medications. How do we get away from that? Because I believe, again, I even saw it with Christy, and she knew better, but I don't feel like she had a way out, but kept adding more and more onto everything. And eventually, one, you're probably harming yourself, but two, it ends up not being you. You're so, I hate to say it, drugged up, but it's true.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, again, that's why I became one of the first people board certified in lifestyle medicine, is because it starts with lifestyle. That's the idea that often people is lost upon people, Jonathan, is that people think, oh, it's all about the genes, right? But if that were the case, then why 25 years after the complete uncoding of the human genome do we still have increasing amounts of disease, right? It's not so much about the genes that you inherit, it's whether or not the genes get turned on. And there are lots of good scientific studies which have proven that what turns on the health promoting genes and turns off the health depleting genes is lifestyle. Eating clean food, whole foods, getting enough quality sleep, getting regular exercise, all those things which we often just take for granted and you know, think if we're walking a mile or two a day, that's good enough. It's just like, no, it's not. And it's not that there's anything wrong with walking that little, but again, what nature has built into our system is, you know, the life of a hunter gatherer who hunter gatherers typically walk 6 to 9 miles a day. You know, that's a lot more than the average American. And that's what turns on the good genes and suppresses the cancer causing genes or the heart disease causing genes or the high blood pressure, right? So what I call it the, nature's instruction book. Reading nature's instruction book is something that we've all been led to believe is, it's kind of like we thinking we can put together an IKEA dresser, right, without looking at the instructions, right?
Right.
I used to do that. Now, and I built a lot of them. I go step by step because I know that's the way to get it done with all the parts and no parts left over, right?
Right.
And it's the same thing with our body. We have just gotten away from the habits we evolved with that created good health. It used to be when I was a kid, you know, like summer vacation, when we got up, we'd be, have some breakfast and then we're out the door. And, my mom would just say, okay, be back before it's dark. Right. So we were outside breathing fresh air,
Mhm.
getting physical activity all day long, getting sunshine. Right. You know, and what do we do today? Oh no, you can't go outside, kids. There could be a juvenile, pederast or something out there. It's too dangerous. Stay inside, and here you can watch some TV, or you can be on your phone or your It's just like, so no activity, no sunshine, eating processed foods. Kids these days, studies indicate that for a child's diet is 60 to 70% processed foods. That's never happened in our entire evolutionary past. You can't, it's the analogy I use is it's like thinking, well, this is a beautiful Ferrari and I care about it. So I'm going to put some organic virgin olive oil in the tank, right? It's like, no, that's not how that Ferrari is going to, run
Right.
properly. You're putting the wrong thing in the tank. And we do that constantly. We're not putting in what our bodies demand for optimal health.
I think you brought it up too. We're not going to see what that's going to cause for a long time, but we're already seeing life expectancy changes in people like me, my age, going down. I mean, people getting cancer. I mean, in
Yep.
their 40s,
Younger.
30s,
Yeah,
40s.
yeah, yeah,
So
yeah,
what is going to happen to our kids if we continue letting that happen?
yeah,
We know what's going to happen. So how do we?
yeah.
I know how we change it. It depends on us parents. Is there a way that we can do it from a proactive standpoint for a community? How do we get that education out?
Well, that was the reason I wrote the book. That's the reason you are offering this wonderful podcast. And I think we just need to continue you know, to do what we do and get the word out because it is there's a growing appreciation. Boy, when I started in 2002, the idea of what I was doing, people thought I was a wacko. It's like,
Right.
what? What are you doing? It's like you're talking about food and exercise and sleep. It's like, can I just have my prescription, please?
Right.
But as you're suggesting, it's like, look, the stats are showing that it's not working. We are getting sicker. We're living, almost as long as you say. Our life expectancy has shortened. We're our what some people call health span is declining. The years of good quality health are declining, and it's so unfortunate because it's so unnecessary. The beautiful thing is, again, it's not a matter of stopping all your medications at once. It's a matter of starting to adopt healthier lifestyle patterns. And, if you don't exercise, it's not a matter of saying, all right, I'm going to run a 10K today. It's like, no, don't be ridiculous. That's not going to happen. And if it does, you're going to regret it.
Right.
Just start by just putting on your tennis shoes and going out for a walk. Start where you are. And if you do something on a consistent basis, it'll lead to dramatic improvements in your health. And that blood pressure medicine that you're taking is not going to be necessary anymore. You know, so, but again, the key is to make small, consistent steps. The analogy I like to use when I do, webinars or presentations is my wife and I were fortunate for my 60th birthday, not 12 years ago, to go on a safari in Africa, and it was truly unbelievably magical. But one of the most amazing things to me was being on the Serengeti, which is, this gorgeous, fertile crescent of life, and just millions and millions of wild animals and plants and whatnot. that that is there not due to the work of the mighty elephant, the fierce lion, any of those animals. The Serengeti exists because of the work of the dung beetle.
Hmm.
A little tiny, well, not so tiny, they're, bigger than a half dollar, but these beetles that will take a little bit of elephant dung and roll it up into a ball and roll it quarter of a mile or further. And that dung obviously, contains what the elephant ate, so it has seeds and whatnot, and as well as fertilizer. And that process of the dung beetles doing that for thousands of years has led to this amazingly beautiful part of the world. So a little tiny bug consistently doing what it does can change everything for everybody.
To me, I always say, it's you're looking at a lifestyle that you're trying to create for a long time. So we're not looking at, okay, I need to do this tomorrow, but you're looking at it for way down the line. This is your future we're talking about, so don't be in a hurry to get there.
Right. And also don't assume that because you're a certain age things are normal, right? People come to me and they'll say, "Well, my doctor told me that, I'm on this blood pressure medicine because I'm getting old," or whatever it is. I go, "That's a bunch of baloney."
Mm.
You know, Honestly, Jonathan, I'm 72. I don't take any medications. I don't need any medications, right? Furthermore, in terms of limitations, well, I'm not walking that far because I'm a little older now. My doctor said just, and again, there are people who are in their 80s that are doing, the triathlon in Hawaii. There was a lady who was, I want to say she was 83, who climbed Mount Everest. I'm 72. I can press 300 pounds. And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm just saying if I had said that to myself, 10, 15, 20 years ago, that I was going to be stronger than I'd ever been in my life, I say, nah, probably not. But I realized that that's just an idea. It's not a fact. It's a thought. Doesn't because you're having that thought doesn't make it a fact unless you make it a fact.
I love the saying, I don't feel old, basically. I still feel young. I mean, it's the attitude again.
Yep. Yep. Totally.
I find
Totally.
myself, I'm coming off, like I said, cancer treatment and all that. I could have easily rolled up into a ball and just said, okay, this is over. But I went from, well, I had surgery over the summer. October, I think I got off weight restrictions. I barely did one pull up. Probably about pulled all my stitches out and stuff. I shouldn't have done it. But today I'm doing 150 pull ups every other day,
Wow.
and But it's the mentality, isn't it? It's,
Yeah, yeah,
okay, I'm 50, I've done all that, but if I can survive that, guess what?
yeah.
I got a lot more to go. And that's just
You're
what people
absolutely
need.
right.
That's the proactive side, isn't it? It's the
Yep,
positivity.
yeah, absolutely.
So it's
Very
never
good.
too
That's
late, is it?
amazing. 150 pull-ups.
It's never too late though, is it?
It's never too late. It's never too late. I don't care what your age is, what your current health situation is. You can always have better health.
Love it. Anything you want to say on the way out?
I think we've covered a lot of territory. I appreciate so much your wonderful hosting. Just again, people, if they're interested in having better health, they need to find places where that can be encouraged and fostered. And going with somebody who practices lifestyle medicine is a good first step. But again, reading my book and just getting the basics down of what a good, healthy lifestyle looks like, even if you're not there, just to get an idea of what direction you want to go in, is kind of the key.
I agree, 100%. Dr. Darren Clair, owner of Vibrance Health and founder, also author of Creating a Life of Vibrance. And I will put everything on the blog that will go with this podcast as well. Thank you, sir. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Jonathan. I appreciated your time.
It was a pleasure. All right, folks, as you guys know, find the attitude, keep the attitude, go out living.